Hello, today I am going to be talking about reflections on water. And so, we started the last session was reflections on mirrors. And today I want to actually move us on to water and more simple reflections on water and how the water fractures and breaks up the reflection. And so that we can work with that. All right, so when we were talking about this last week, I was showing this bird ceramic on a mirror and how the reflection was almost perfect underneath. And we briefly discussed the fact that when it's on water, the water surface is not perfectly flat. And if, like this, where we're out on the bay, there's a little bit of wave action that comes through. And if you look carefully, you can actually see where the waves are running through here and how each time a wave comes through, it breaks and moves this reflection into a new pattern. Now, if it's a little flatter and still maybe just a little bit of wind had been on the surface and broken it up, we once again, this is Lake Merritt, so it's much flatter water, but there's still a little tiny bit of wave action as we can see here at the beach. And so what happens with that water is that where you see blue is where the sky is reflecting toward us, and where we see the buildings is where the building is reflecting toward us. So part of what makes this look like it's water is having these breaks of blue sky run through that reflection. So the closer it gets to us, the more the waves look a little bigger and how it breaks it even more. The other interesting thing is that when we had it on the glass, our reflection didn't go any taller and actually was a little bit shorter than the item itself. But here in this broken reflection, it breaks and it keeps coming toward us. And so we get a much longer reflection here than what we got on the glass. So I've done a couple of little sketches here so that we can do a quick a painting of each of these two. I'm not going to do anything too fancy, but I just want to sort of show you how I try and make this look like it's on water. Our sky and water are quite light, but our lightest thing is actually this boat right here. So we can start by doing a little bit of negative painting and paint the water but leave those little white places of the reflection, and then we'll let that dry just a little bit and we'll come back in and we'll paint the dark of the dark reflection. So that water it's a little bit of a grayish color. I'm going to start with cobalt blue. Cobalt blue. And if I really wanted to do the finish on this, I could take it up and do the sky up above as well. Now, this is something that I could do masking fluid where those whites are, but I'm going to do paint around just to show you how that's done. So we're graying this out just a little bit. I'm feeling like I want to add some phthalo blue to that because I'm feeling like it should go a little bit more of a greenish blue. But it's still pretty pale, but it's dark enough that we can see that white next to it. And the dark side of the boat is going to go even darker. So I can paint right across that to start with and then come back in and do a much darker layer on it later. So I'm going to come around this, paint right next to that boat. And the other thing about painting water is that you want to have a fair, and I'm going to go right up into the sky because we can come back in and paint those darker hills. And let's see. Yep, we can do just about everything here. Maybe a skittering of some light running up the forestay of that boat. So let's just want to keep this pretty pale, but dark enough that that's going to stand out as white. So I'm just adding a little bit of water to it and pulling it down. Now, once I get past the end of this boat here, this is where I have to come in and just start cutting directly straight across. So when I'm doing water reflection, I think about painting downward and sideways. And because most of our little breaks at least further away, will be horizontal. And so if I come in here and I paint these horizontal, just some of them are starting to pull in a little bit. A few of them are longer than others, but none of them, oh, I have one down here in the bottom here that actually sticks out a little further because the wave takes and pulls it over. And that's about all the white ones that we see on that side. So now I can just paint this water on down in here. And it can go right through that darker area. And the boat now, this other side of the boat is dark, so I can just paint that right through. I'm going to just find the edge of that boat, and then this, well, I've got to get a little bit more water off my brush because then I can't do the delicateness. So we wanted to just have a little, whoops, a couple little light pieces showing through up on that forestay of the boat. The forestay being the wire that attaches the forward sail to the boat. And if I want this sky to have a little bit of cloud action in it, we can just paint a little bit of dark through there. Those hills we're going to paint later. And once again, I have to be careful about getting this too dark, so I'm going to thin this down a little bit here. Now as I come in on this other side of the reflection, I have to be a little careful. So it's almost straight as it comes off the boat. And some of them tie together there. And then a few of them stick out just a tiny bit to the side. And that dark is going to go off to the right a little bit, and we'll just pull that on down. And I feel like I got this a little too dark right in here. So while this is still quite wet, I can pick this up and move that water color just a little bit. And then as we get down in here, we have those waves that are coming through, and they're being a little bit darker in broken patches. So let's just break this a little bit. Pull some more water in there. We don't want that white spot. And then I'll let this dry while I work on the other side, and that's not going to be white there. And then we can come back in and get the what do I want to say, the darker pieces of this put in. And interestingly, this down in this lower area, the thing with water is you really have to look very carefully at what it's doing. And as it gets closer, instead of being completely horizontal, now we can start getting a little diagonal to it. And I'm also seeing what looks like patchwork quilt here, where I probably have two sets of waves coming through, breaking against each other. So the light and dark is coming in sort of squares. And I'm going to leave this alone, but I'm going to lift that later and get, or not lift it, but make it, yes, lift it. I'm going to make it softer by lifting a little bit of those edges so that that won't be so hard later. But for right now, I think this is a point when I need to just leave this alone. Let's just take a couple of little pieces all the way to this edge, because I did that lift. See, that's already looking like the boat reflected on there, but when I get the dark side, it'll really look great. Okay, so let's look at my other one. So my second one is two buildings and a dark building. So we've got a dark side and a light side, and once again a dark side and a light side. Color coming in through here. This is a brownish building, so there's really not much in the way of color, but there's also these beautiful blue lines that are running through here. So I have a choice of how to do this. One is to go ahead and paint this in, and which is what I think I'm going to do. Paint this in and then come back with an almost dry brush and pull paint off of there. Now another choice would be for me to paint this lake totally blue, and then let it dry, and then come back and paint this in, and then lift that so the blue will show through. Otherwise, I've got to add that blue in later. There's a little bit of blue in this light side here because your reflection in water, unlike a glass, it doesn't all totally reflect back at you, so you actually see a little bit of the color of the water surface, and so we get a little bit of a bluey gray toning down in here, and my darks in here are not quite as dark as what they are up above because the water can't give us that pure reflection back. So which way are we going to do this? You know, since we're playing blues, let me just go ahead and start this with that blue direction. So I'm going to paint the blue sky down to these buildings, and then paint this water blue. And I'm starting with a little bit of cobalt blue. I'm adding a touch of phthalo to it because I'm feeling like it needs to head that direction. And it's fairly pure. With this one, I grayed out. This is a fairly bright day. It's darker, the blue is darker up in the sky than it is right at the horizon as it hits those mountains. And then it repeats that same thing in here. So it's a little bit lighter at this point and a little darker when it gets down there. So have I mixed enough paint? Better to mix too much than not enough. And is it too bright now? Do we have to add a little bit of, I'm going to add a little bit of ultramarine to it just to maybe knock it back a little bit. And yeah, I think that'll be okay. Now I'm going to pre-wet this page just a little bit. Yeah, I can do it with this flat brush. I think I'm going to be able to get those colors on a little more effectively if I have a layer of water underneath. I have to stay away from my buildings. I could go underneath the dark side of this building. I could go underneath the dark side of that building. Do I want to? It'd be easier if I did. So yes, let's do that. We'll go dark side. And once again, in these plants in this area, I don't see anything that the blue can't, well, maybe we'll leave a little bit of stuff there. Oh, and you know, I didn't draw a line for where that, and I think I might be too late now to do it. Okay, let's just pay attention to this. Although we were going to do a lift, weren't we, Margaret? I might not need to worry about it. Now, these buildings in here, I do want to leave those white. Once again, I'm doing this pretty, what I would call loosey-goosey. I'm not going to try and get lots of detail here, but I want to be accurate enough in my, and we're going to paint on that side of that building, accurate enough in my patterns here that it feels right. So I'm not going to just throw this on willy-nilly. I am thinking about how I'm doing it, but I'm not trying to get every single detail. I'm trying to get the big shapes, but the big shapes accurately. Now there are whites that run down in here, but they are not, I can pick them out. So when I do a water reflection like this, there's actually a couple ways I do it. Sometimes I do it in rows so that I can really pay attention to how, and we're going to be putting blue in there. I can pay attention to how the colors are going on. So it depends on what I'm actually doing, how I do this. So if we start up there, and then I'm going to start pulling this down, this building, we're going to keep that light side, and we're coming down into some of these trees. We're leaving a few little lightish places in there, but then all of this water is blue. And then it gets darker as it gets down into here. So let's just go ahead and put some darker down in here. Darker and lighter both. Hopefully I haven't gotten that too intense. And now while my brush is still just slightly loaded, let's bring it down, find the top of this building, which I've already gone over the edge of it a little bit. One advantage of using this flat brush is that I can really pull a lot of paint and get it flat. That's dark on that side of that. And then down in here, I'm going to leave some of this, I think. Oh, it's always this hard decision. I could paint blue completely underneath of, I'm going to paint blue completely underneath of that one. And I'm going to pull this down in here a little further because that was just, oops, got to bring all the way up to my horizon line so I don't get brush marks. Otherwise, especially with this flat brush. Now you notice that I'm painting all of these vertical. I want to because now I can start getting some of that feeling of that verticality of the reflection when I put this down. And now this sky has to come down. And I'm going to give this sky just a little more oomph up high here. This is still fairly wet, so I can do this. It's going to stop on the edge of this building. And let's just take that across. See if we can get that to... Every time I lift and move my brush, it leaves a mark. So I got to be a little careful of that. And now I've put some right into my other painting here. And has this dried enough? I think it has. So while the lake reflection is drying, I'm going to come back in and do some of the darks on my boat. So I need to make a dark. And do I want to use that mixture? So black is all three primary colors. So it doesn't matter if I have dirty pan green in here. Let's put some blue down first. And then one of my favorite quick to make black mixtures is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And if I want it to lean slightly to the warm side, I put a little bit more ultramarine, a little bit more burnt sienna in it. And if I want it to lean toward the cool side, I leave a little bit more ultramarine blue in it. And I'm going to lean this very slightly warm. And I think I need to get a smaller brush. Let's see, one thing. Before I do this, yes, I do need to do one thing before I do this. I'm just looking at my picture, and I want to put those hills in the back. And I need, let's just take a little bit of this blue that I had already mixed up and add just a wee touch of gray to it. A little more ultramarine blue. I don't want this too dark. Hopefully this is not too dark. Probably is a little bit dark. Okay, just take a little water out of my brush. Ah, yes. And then make some shapes here. So I'm just coming in and finding that horizon, making some shapes of those hills, and I can paint right through the boat, right underneath of my figure. I just don't want to get on that white side. And then it looks like it's sort of hazing out toward this right side here a little bit. So I'm going to thin that just a little. Okay, and then it's a little darker right at the very bottom. So I think I can drop some of my black into here, just a wee touch. Right at that horizon line. All right, and now this forward part of these waves, we're just doing the waves, so I'm thinking about the fact that there's sort of a diagonalness to this, and I'll soften these a little bit. after I do this. And that one's going to have to get thinned out a little bit. And we were going to, I was going to do a little bit of softening on these, which I guess I can do now when I'm softening this. And then there's some diagonals that run not straight up and down, but at a diagonal in through here. So now I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it 3/4 of the way, pick some of this up because that was just a little too much, and I want to soften the edges of that. And then maybe another row of it right in through there. So we're just trying to get a little feeling of what those waves are doing. Softening. So I'm not waiting too long on this. This is still, my pieces that I painted down are still damp. And I'm just coming in with a halfway, 3/4 way dry brush so that I can dampen the edges of what I just did without introducing a lot of extra water, so that we can get a soft edge on that. Because when these waves move through here, they're doing little soft rollers. They don't have a hard edge on them. Now, if I were to do the waves that come in and crash on the beach, those do have hard edges on the top of those just before they turn and crash. That would be a whole nother thing, wouldn't it? Water. Water is, I love water. It's always different, always shifting, always a little something you weren't expecting. So I'm going to just come in and soften the edges of these guys. I don't know, maybe I haven't waited quite long enough. Sometimes if you don't wait quite long enough, the paint hasn't totally gotten up to the surface, and this whole lifting thing doesn't work quite as well. So I might need to come back on those later. But I'm just at this point just trying to soften what I did here with a little bit of a damp brush while this is still wet. Okay, now I think we can get back to my other. And, ooh, look at this little blossom that happened there. We have some hills that are going to happen in the back of that, don't we? Shall we put those hills in next? Is this, how wet is this? Okay, it's not 100% dry, but it's dry enough that I don't think that things are going to move on it. Now, those hills are a little bit more of a gray blue. So remember that, I'm going to take some of that black, mix it into, that needs more blue in there. And I see some greens back in there too, so some of my dirty green might be able to go in there too. So we're just, and I probably shouldn't be bothering with this because we're supposed to be talking about those reflections, but sometimes you need to know what they're coming down against. And the fact that these reflections, these hills, are not actually showing in the final painting. And maybe there's some breaks in there. Just, I'm not trying to, I just want a sense that there's buildings there without getting totally tied up in what they look exactly like. What do we do next on this? The dark side of this building. So the dark side of this building, and I'm running a risk here because now it's going to want to bleed into, so I'm going to leave just a little bit of a white line. Try and keep that from Go up to there. And you know, down in here, I don't care if it bleeds in there a little bit. Let's just let it bleed into that background just a hair. Say we don't really care. I'm feeling this building is wider at the top than it is down lower, so let's just bring that down a little bit more, and that's okay. It's gonna bleed into there. Now this other side of the building, I'm gonna just put some little dots here. Of course, this is not coming out quite how I wanted it. I suppose we could be spending more time getting this perfect. I need to keep this diagonal still happening in these rows as they go across here. Maybe I shouldn't be pressing as hard on them. Maybe if I did a little, just push but don't push, touch but don't push. And it's going to feel a little bit more, and maybe they can join together a little tiny bit. Oh, that looks better. Yeah. Okay, let's just take a line through them and tie them together a little bit there. All right. And now this other side of this building here, yeah, I'm going to put this gray on here first, and then we'll come back in with a little bit of that brown color. But I think this is going to help me distinguish some of those pieces in there. Once again, I'm not why I'm getting into this detail, because I have a hard time not, right? All right. And once again, some of these bushes, let's get a little brown with a little gold. And I'm going to let that just go right up into that building. But now we have to come in and be hard against this water line here, or this is not going to look like the end of water back there. Ooh, I like that some of that is actually bleeding up into there. Nice, okay. My reflection down below here, when it joins at this, there may be, I can't quite see, there might be a few places where there's some light where this touches the edge, and there's other places where it's just going to sort of, it's got to go right underneath that. So this beginning part of it, we definitely don't have any lines across through it. So I can, and as it comes down in here further, I can start painting this horizontal in through here. Some of these spaces are bigger than others. And as it gets further and further down in here, we see less of this and more blue until we get down to our rocks that are down here at the very bottom. I'm trying to keep this as close to that edge line as I can, and I think something I'm going to need to do here is take my rag clean that edge up a little bit. Yeah, that's better. But I see one of them that didn't get it. You. Now, the other side of this building is a lighter shade, and now that that's dried some, I could put just a little bit of this slightly lighter shade on here. And now this, I'm seeing what looks like vertical lines. So I'm going to just paint this as vertical lines down here with that little bit of blue showing through. And then some of these light spaces, let's dry my brush down, oh, about here. I'm going to just come in a horizontal and pick some of that off. too worried about that, Margaret. You're going to come back in with some blue beside that. So I'm just picking some of these blue lines off of here now while I can, while it's wet with an almost dry brush. And then my water, we have a slightly darker piece that's going to run down through here. And then maybe that's too dark. Ooh, Margaret. So that's where my white is. Okay. Until it comes down in here and finds some blue waves that are running across through here. So each of these pieces, as I do it through here, and then it's a lighter space, and where that brown is, it's going to go a little bit darker. And I just find some little thin lines. And some of these are going to come and cross right through here, horizontal, 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 and keep it nice and smooth up at the top there. Make that horizontal. Bring these right through. And maybe some of that gets broken. Now, my side building here, it's more of a burnt sienna, orangish. Let's see, that's quinacridone sienna. Let's use burnt. Yeah, it's a beautiful color. So this building has got some of that running down it. And it's got a few places where it cuts through. And let's just put it right onto what's going here. And up there as well. Ah, nice. Now, when that gets down into the bottom, it is toned quite a bit. So let me just add a little bit of blue to that. It's going to run down like that. And there's another little piece of it. And then the dark side. And then while it's still wet, let's come back in with an almost dry brush and lift some of this off. And we'll put some blue in there too. Now, I don't want these too even. I'm seeing uneven bits, and I'm seeing some of this quite light. Be careful here. This doesn't get too much out into this other area here. And now let's bring some of this blue into here. And that blue is a bit dark, so let's just lighten it up here. And this blue now needs to come down and be part of this. And not quite that dark, so let me lighten it just a hair. Oops, careful there. These buildings, you know, putting some windows in here suddenly make things look like buildings. Maybe break that balcony, break that, some vertical pieces, some little building things. That's enough building stuff to make that look like buildings. And let's just, now down in here our waves start turning because they're closer to us, so we can actually see that they're turning as they come into that beach. So those lines cross and come around and break through this building. And they're coming across. They're not just in front of that building. They actually are working their way all the way across through that reflection. And then we'll put a little bit of dark for the stones in the front. And I think this piece will be as done as I was planning on getting it. Oh, and you know what I didn't have? I have one more little thing to add on this building up here. And it has a top piece up here. There we go. And that could go a little bit darker there, a little darker here, a little darker there. Okay. And that building, yes, this building can go a little darker down in here. And once again, these are sort of coming down in vertical lines through the shape of that. Let's maybe lift a little for those bushes. And those bushes are not getting reflected in what we see, partially because I'm seeing something else back here. There's a little bit of a dark reflection way back here that's probably from those trees. Right in here, there's a little dark reflection. And there's not there because I think there's some docks or some crazy thing there. All right, we're going to get back into throwing some rocks in here. So these rocks work their way through this, and then there's mud here with holes in it. So let me just make this sort of soft and leave some holes and do some little calligraphy here, leaving holes behind. Try and make that look like beach without getting too detailed with it. And then we need just a little bit of dark to really pull our eye up there. Remember that whole thing that in the foreground you're going to have some of your, well, whatever your center of interest is, will have some of the darkest darks, lightest lights, but the foreground tends to be darker than anything far away. Okay, so that one's done, and now let me just spend a little bit of time on that boat, and then I think we better quit because I think this is going to be a little longer demo than what I did the other day. So let me get my boat up where I can see it. You know, I'm going to leave it over to this side. I'm not sure what you guys are going to be able to, I'll be putting, when I make this into the video, I'll make it so that there's a little clip of it so you'll be able to see it. So now what I need is my almost black. Well, first we need a dark gray for the side of that boat. So the side of this boat is a dark gray blue. Yeah, and keep that blue with it because the blue of the water is being reflected up into this white boat. And like a building, the boat is going to come down a little bit into the water and go up a little bit at the top so that the perspective works. And then as it hits this center here, there's a little bit of a break. And then we have some very thin line breaks here. I guess those are the sails. So we're just breaking across. And then actually as this comes forward, and we're getting the reflection of that dark black sail, it gets darker on that reflection because of what it's reflecting. Not so much that and some of those go off. And it's going to pull over here, work its way over to the side, and we're just playing with those, where those waves are, how they're breaking this. And then there's a little skinny piece. Oh, you know, I'm probably not doing it exactly accurate. It's okay. we're playing against these waves that are here, and I know that when I come to a wave, I have to have it change. And then you get this little funny skinny line that comes way down and then works its way back up that wave, circles back, works its way down this next wave, circles back, makes a little circle. These are actually sort of fun to play with. You just have to sort of look at the abstract shapes and not get too tied up into what you think they should be, because you're just not going to see them the way you would like to. And that's that. Now let's go back up and get this figure. So the figure is an oval shape or triangular shape, maybe slightly fatter up on that shoulder, and then a little dot for the head. If we make the figure too big, then the boat's going to get looking like it's tiny, and we don't necessarily want that. I probably already got that figure too big. I was doing boat portraits for a while, and I had one client that, he gave me a photograph to work from, and I worked it all up, and I, showed it to him mostly done. And he says, that makes my boat look like it's 25 feet long instead of 50 feet long. And why? And we got looking at it. It's because I made the people too big. And so that the relative size of those people to the boat gave an indication of how big the boat was. So I think I'm going to have to take a little piece off the top of his head because his head is too big. And I'm just making some little white spaces here because there's probably a little white tape on the front of his sail. And then he has a dark line right here at the water. A few of these spots are a little darker. And that one's done. Okay, and then let's get his head a little smaller. Get his head a lot smaller by lifting some of it away. That looks better. Okay, I think we might be good. And I'm going to be just fussy in my boat portrait thing. Let's take his boom up just a little tiny bit here. Okay, so we're not seeing any reflections from these back mountains. We're not seeing reflections until we find that boat. And I see something else that's not going to be correct. It's going to bother me. There we go. Get that line squared away there. Actually, that should go almost straight across, shouldn't it, Margaret? Looking at that. There we go. That's better. That's better. And let's get this dark all the way up to the top of there. And maybe it's a little darker right at that tip, right where his bow comes in. And there's probably another person here right over there. So let's just make a little indication of a body and leave it at that. So there we are. On the bay, where there's some waves that are coming through the still water, they're going to take and break that reflection into all kinds of interesting patterns. And then there's these diagonal lines of where the edges of the waves come, and we have light reflecting from that back up to us. And down in here, we have, almost a patchwork because a second set of waves have broken this and made the waves have two directions to them. Now on the lake, we have a darker building, and actually, now it's bothering me, that we need to have this come out even a little further here. And that's actually better, that's a little bit darker there. It should be close, a little bit lighter than the building up above, but And I'm going to just put a little more dark in that building up above to make it even a little bit darker there. So this should be very slightly lighter than the building up above, because when it reflects off of the water, it doesn't reflect as much as the light that we're seeing from up above. And sorry, I hate it when I get fussy, but I'm getting fussy here. I'm just feeling like that building needed a little bit more oomph to it. And some of these spots down here could actually be a little bit darker. So it's getting a little bit lighter as it comes toward me, but not entirely, but it's getting broken a lot more. So these are just little skinny lines of dark coming through those blues, but the reflection still stays right underneath of what's there. So I think I've done enough. You guys get to play with it now and see what you can do. All right, talk to you later.